Are students architects actually?
Yes, we're faculty of architecture, so these are architects only.
And which year?
Sixth, so the last grade, sixth.
Jak chcemy zacząć? Ja masz minutę?
Počkaj, pozrieť sa, či sa niekto ešte pripája.
Ja som im poslala link, ale to tam nehajďakujem.
Dobre.
Že majú tam ten stream.
Tak začneme.
Okay, everyone. So I would like to welcome our next speaker during our reflections on architecture, our Ukrainian series. It's Ievgenia Gubkina, who was kind enough to give us our lecture here at the Faculty of Architecture. So just a short introduction. She's an architect, architectural and urban historian, curator and co-founder of the NGO Urban Forms Centre Kharkiv. She also co-founded an NGO Modernistiski, which is a women's avant-garde movement. Her work specializes in architecture and urban planning of the 20th century in Ukraine, and also multidisciplinary approach to heritage studies. She currently is a lecturer at the Bartlett School of Architecture, UCL London, UK. So thank you very much, Ievgenia. Welcome, and we're also going to show a short movie before the presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I will return here after the screening of the film.
Yes.
Okay, see you in a bit.
Знаєш, тепер все по-іншому. Ти знімала у 2013-му, 2014 був лінією розмежування. Майдан, Янукович, Небесна Сотня. Війна, війна, війна. Звикаємо до війни. Війна скінчиться. Війна ніколи не скінчиться. Що є влада в просторі? Як її захоплювати? Як її брати? Як утримувати? Коли я була маленька, я дуже любила посеред Майдану. Ось просто тут. Лягти і дивитися на небо. Як приємно, коли спина відчуває тепло, нагрітий сонцем асфальт. Майдан величезний, як поле. Або ні. Це мій пляж. Якщо мені треба було перетнути Майдан, я йшла по діагоналі. Довго-довго. якщо ж потрібно було пройти з головної вулиці міста через Майдан до Держпрому, то обов'язково по центру. Це відчуття, його не можна повторити. Відчуття всесилля, підкорення собі величезного простору, ніби стихії. Це був мій рух, мій процес, мій catwalk. А тут мої глядачі. Моя сцена. Зараз тут паркінг. Машини перетинають по діагональ Майдан. Революція і сила революції. Пам'ятаю, ми годинами сиділи перед екраном і слухали стукіт бруківки. Весь Майдан Свободи у бруківці. В якому моменті історії ми перебуваємо зараз? Чи була поразка революції? Чи була поразка у війні? Війна вже починає здаватися чимось віддаленим, міфічним. Війна – це покарання за революцію? Ні, ми виросли з духом революції. Берлінська стіна, 89-й рік. Революція на граніті, 90-й. Штурм Білого дому. «89-й, 90-й, 91-й, 92-й, 93-й. Революція і сила революції. Знаєш, тепер уже все по-іншому. Леніна вже немає. Зараз тут порожнеча. Так його насправді й не було. Коли його не було? До 1964-го. Тут була порожнеча. Його довго возили Майданом і поставили на це місце. Порожнє місце, ніщо, можливість. На його місці зараз лежить бруківка іншого кольору. Від нього залишилася пляма. Її видно на дроні. А може це тінь? Тінь того, чого не було тоді. Коли? У 1925-му. «25, 26, 27. Круглий Майдан». Круговий рух по ньому. Майдан і його центр. Це космос, це світобудова, організований світ. Модель світу, цикл, зацикленість, вир, повторення і знову бруківка. Що є основою цієї моделі світу? Звісно, Держпром. Будинок державної промисловості. А потім будинок кооперації, будинок уряду, будинок проєктів. Кооперація, промисловість, проєкти. Все це циклічно йде по колу. А що в центрі цього світу? У самому центрі цього круглого майдану порожнє місце. На нього міг стати будь-хто, будь-який перехожий, той, хто біжить на роботу, студент, дитина. Зупинитися в самому центрі кола, розкинути руки, подивитися на небо і стати центром світобудови, як вікторіанська людина епохи відродження. На цьому місці, здається, у 2018 році міська рада хотіла поставити величезну колону, вищу за Держпром. Люди на вулицях говорили, нам це не треба. На питання журналістів, а що вони хочуть натомість, люди відповідали – нічого. Що ви хочете замість Леніна? Що ви хочете замість стели? Що ви хочете замість будівель? Ми хочемо ніщо. Ми хочемо порожнечу. Порожнеча – це твердиня чи ніщо? Ландшафт чи будівля? Гора чи завод? Процес чи мета? Форма чи функція? Залиште нам порожнечу. Порожнеча – це і є свобода.
Siamo grismonti schiavi, stretti in ferrocatene. Sorge sul mar la luna, nuotan le stelle in cielo, ma sulle nostre luci stesa in funereo velo. Torme di schiavi adusti, mini a gemer sul remo. Speziamo queste carene, pochini al mare, semplicemente schiavi.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this very long actually film. And it was shot in 2018, before the full-scale invasion and after the annexion of Crimea by Russian Federation and after already the Donbas war in 2014. But at the same time, for Ukraine and Ukrainian NGO sector or NGO network in Ukraine, it was a very important period because a lot of different very interesting projects they took place during this time. Unfortunately, it's kind of a new interwar period, a new glory age for Ukraine, because I started actually my career from the interwar modernist research, but another kind of interwar modernism, interwar period between the Second World War and First World War. So today I would like to share maybe some few main points about my path, both career path and maybe even activist experience, and at the same time me in the field of academia and attempts to be activist but in the field of academia. Which was quite problematic and quite difficult, and especially for now, because already for 2 years I have been teaching at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and British Academy is very classic and conventional type of academy, and attempts to make any kind of revolutions there, they're a bit more difficult and complicated than to make revolutions in Ukraine and in Ukrainian academy, to be honest. But at the same time, I still didn't lose my hope actually to change something in the attempts to deconstruct grand narratives, not only of Russian Federation, not only Russian imperialistic narratives, but actually other empires, and maybe that's why actually Great Britain is the best place to exercise on these attempts to decentralize history, to deconstruct sometimes historical narratives, and sometimes to decolonize the historical narratives as well. So this movie was filmed by me and Tatiana Kononenko. She is Ukrainian origin German documentary film director. That's why maybe the film is quite long, because it's one of the main features, I would say, of German documentary school in general. And another very important moment about this film that it was actually the part of the bigger project Encyclopedia of Architecture of Ukraine, which was sponsored by Ministry of Culture of Ukraine in 2019-2020. And what was quite significant about this project that was actually organized and developed by NGO in which I was a director, NGO Urban Forms Centre, that in 2019, 2020, 2021, it was quite usual that quite a big scale, large scale projects, they were developed by NGOs, but not state institutions. Which was, I think, something very important about Ukraine as well, and Ukrainian culture. So this project actually summarized a lot of different layers and styles and epochs in the history of Ukrainian architecture, but it was led by NGOs and activists. That's why we can make some different experiments. We can give kind of microphone and voices to someone who would never be actually invited to tell something about the history of Ukrainian architecture if this project would be led by some state institutions. And I think that it was kind of a democratization of historical field and architecture in particular. So our idea was actually to make some small essay, visual essay on what is a phenomenon of power but in space. And that's why we decided to take as an example Freedom Square in Kharkiv, which is an ensemble of constructivist or interwar modernist architecture.
Sorry,
And
I'm sorry, don't you want to share your screen with your presentation? Because you're not sharing.
Yeah, I can start sharing my screen.
We can't see it.
Are you sharing it? Sorry.
So I tried, but yeah, I failed a bit, so I'm sorry for 1 minute.
Okay.
I will try again. Yeah, now it should work.
Okay, cool.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Yeah, and actually, as you saw already during this film, it's very much about the central part of the city, and one of the main objects of this ensemble of interwar modernism, it was actually the Dersprom building, about which I will tell you a bit further. But in general, all my maybe path, historical path, or I mean a historian's path or architect's path, started from the research of heritage of interwar period and from socialist cities. And on the screen right now, you can see actually one of the very so-called kind of difficult heritage sites in Kharkiv, and that is socialist city New Kharkiv, which was developed for the Kharkiv tractor factory. And you can see actually quite a tough conditions of living in this settlement or neighborhood. And it was built in 1920s, 1930s. And I grown up in exactly this neighborhood, and for me it was very important to research exactly this part of the city. At the same time, it was many times blamed for some architectural mistakes of architects of 1920s, 1930s, modernist architects. Sometimes people who lived there, they were stigmatized, and all this district, even the people themselves who live there, they call this district as Ukrainian or Kharkiv Detroit. So I was very much interested on interdisciplinary approach, on attempts to combine sociology and urban studies and memory studies on the case of this settlement. Even here you can see the photo of Anna Stakova. She is Israeli film director and photographer, and she tried to catch exactly this conflict between environment, between actually the conditions of living of people who live there, and some utopian dreams of architects of 1920s, 1930s. So it's very much proletariat heritage. I will not show you this movie. I will skip. But I felt quite trapped into the actually Ukrainian academia framework. And to be honest, as a younger researcher, I didn't like to work for institutions. That's why from 2014, I decided together with my friend and partner Oleg Nesterenko develop Urban Forms Centre, and we actually had some ambitious plans to integrate our new and fresh ideas and sometimes very bold ideas on history and on urban planning into academy. And to make some small and sometimes bigger changes. And I will try to show you a few of my projects, both within actually NGO Urban Forms Centre and absolutely independent and personal field of work. So one of such projects, it was my book on Slavutich. Slavutich was the city developed after Chernobyl nuclear power plant catastrophe. In 1986-1988. That is very interesting case and one of the fields of my actually research, which is now very much connected with the Soviet atomic project, and not only Soviet atomic project, but a lot of other different nuclear power, energy, and nuclear weapons projects. But everything started actually with this Slavutich, which is the youngest city in Ukraine. And kind of the example actually of attempts of Soviet architects to develop some postmodernist architecture, but still in late socialism. At the same time, this jump from 1920s and from the very niche kind of research only on the actually totalitarian heritage, on the intermodernist heritage, or avant-garde or constructivism of 1920s, 1930s, towards something from the very end of Soviet era, from the period of Soviet Union collapse or collapsing, gave me the huge palette of the whole timeline of Soviet history. And I was very much grateful to this project because in the very beginning I had some doubts whether I had any expertise actually to jump from 1920s, 1930s into 1980s and late socialism. But actually everything possible, and that's why I would encourage younger researchers actually to make your timeline and your sphere of knowledge wider. So another project that I contributed into the book published by Park Books, Utopia in Collapse, Rethinking Metsamor, that is already about Armenian nuclear power plant city satellite Metsamor. And maybe one of the most important and for me personally, and at the same time even maybe for Ukrainian, I hope, Ukrainian history of architecture, that was the book Soviet Modernism, Brutalism and Postmodernism that was published by Snowy Publishing House, that is Ukrainian publishing house, and German Berlin-based Dom Publishers in 2019. It's a huge coffee table book which kind of a review of all the different movements and different strata of Soviet post-war, post-Second World War modernism in Ukraine. And this book was the result of maybe, I would say, more than 2 years of research of different travelings and trips within the whole Ukraine, numerous interviews with architects, and we were lucky actually to catch up with architects in their already, I would say, 80s, or some architects they were already in their 90s, and we were very lucky to take interviews with them. The book was wrote by me and photographer Alex Bykov. It was really our attempt to try to structuralize the whole field of knowledge about modernism in Ukraine. We had some discussions on the title together with the publishers, and we decided to integrate the term brutalism and even postmodernism according to the heritage of 1960s, 1980s in Soviet Ukraine, which was quite controversial for these days, because some researchers and historians, they thought that we should call this all layer of architecture only as modernism, but brutalism is kind of the term only for Great Britain, but never for Soviet Union. And definitely the most problematic term was postmodernism, because some, even again Western actually historians, they thought that in socialist states it was no possibility for postmodernism to be developed, as in under the totalitarian regimes, under the socialist regimes. It was no irony, and it was too much censorship. That's why postmodernism, as it is, couldn't develop. But my counter-argumentation to such kind of way of thinking was actually that it was possible, and maybe sometimes even better than in Western or capitalist countries. So, and a lot of city walks, guiding tours, because it was all the time not enough for me only to write books or to give lectures or to take part in conferences. That's why I usually try to work with people just on the side. And on the right picture you can see, for example, politicians and Minister of Culture of Ukraine back then. And on the left, there is the tours for journalists, and sometimes I remember, tours for pupils of local schools and so on. So, and maybe the main part of my work, it was connected with academic activism, which I called it like this, or institutionalization actually of informal science. So, as I already told you, it was the period of Urban Forms Centre for me. We organized the series of conferences that called Modernistki, Gender Issues in Art, Architecture and Urban Planning. And I would say that sometimes, even if you develop some conferences and some projects, not within the academy, not within the universities, but outside of universities, it might have a very strong impact, both for society, for culture, for activist circles, but at the same time even for academia. So actually we invited academics on our site, on our spaces, which were independent, like galleries or libraries and so on, but not within the walls of universities. But then actually we influenced on discourse of academy on, for example, usage of feminitives, and maybe it's the same in any Slavic or Slavonic languages, that we had this part of the word ki, modernist ki, because if we would say modernist, it would mean male modernist architect, but if we would say modernist ki, it would mean actually female modernist architects. And for us it was very important, and even in a few years after this, even the language norm changed in Ukraine, and even in official documents right now, there is a lot of feminitives could be written. So you can write architectorka directly in the official documents, and it was kind of actually a huge success both for feminist movements and any other human rights movements in Ukraine. So within these conferences, we actually found out a huge spectrum of different biographies and lives of female architects, both in Soviet Union and in contemporary and modern Ukraine. And when we started this project, a lot of skeptics, they said that there were no actual female or women history in architecture because it was no females or women in architecture, and we actually argued with this, and we proved that we had hundreds of different biographies and actually significant contribution into the development of Ukrainian architecture made and developed by women in not only in the 20th century but in 21st century. And even we found out some very interesting stories about the female architects from the 19th century. So another field of our work, it was our activism in pedagogy and independent pedagogy in the sphere of architecture. So, for example, it was a series of schools, the idea of the city reality check. We developed them both in Lviv, together with the Lviv Center of Urban History, and in Slavutich, in collaboration with Slavutich City Council. Of course, it was somehow connected with my book. And I really very much proud of this collaboration, because for us it was very important to combine all these different efforts from different segments of our society, both from local power and local administrations, like Slavutich administration of the city, and at the same time again academy, independent academy, official academy, and at the same time students from all over the world and Slavutich residents. So we developed the program that included not only the workshops and lectures for the students of our summer school, but actually public programs that took place in evenings that were open for all the residents of Slavutich. And we designed this program, public program, together with activists from Slavutich. We asked people what they want actually to hear, whom they want to be invited to Slavutich, and expectations, they were very high. So, for example, they expected Kate Brown, who was one of the kind of stars in the atomic research in the world. And we invited her, and she gave the perfect lecture there. And for example, again, it was a request from Slavutich people to invite Owen Hatherley, who wrote the book, which was a bestseller, Landscapes of Communism, published in Penguin Books. And there you can see on the slide actually his lecture that took place in the basement of swimming pool. Another thing that it was the part of public program, we were not shy and we never questioned some popular approach, how to popularize not only difficult architecture or Soviet architecture, but at the same time academic events and make them popular actually. That's why we invited pop, I would say like top 3 pop star of electronic music in Ukraine, Anuka. She was really on top charts of Ukrainian music back then in 2016. And here you can see her concert or rooftop gig in Slavutich that she gave for free for Slavutich residents and students of our summer school. We made some changes in, for example, even local administration, I would say. It was, for example, the conference Bauhaus Zaporizhia, which were made in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. That's why you can see this Bauhaus Zaporizhia in the title. And because of this conference, then more than 40 objects of heritage, which were Soviet actually era heritage sites. They were included in local list of heritage preservation. That's why I think that it was kind of our again success and our quite practical results of what we did. That was the book published after this conference. And here you can see already this project Encyclopedia of Architecture of Ukraine. Then after my presentation, you can try to find this on the internet and have maybe I hope you would have some understanding of what was Ukrainian landscapes of architecture back then before the full-scale invasion. Then it was another bigger project together again, exactly because we developed our friendship and collaboration with Anuka, this electronic music pop star. It was the project Ukrainian Constructivism, which was the attempt actually to develop opera with contemporary dance performances developed by Danish contemporary ballet dancer Sebastian Koberg. And again, you can have a look because all these websites, they still exist. And that is our actually attempted to make some experiments in the field of web design and to make experiments on the border between architecture, architectural history, music, and dance, and at the same time web design. So I hope you would enjoy. There is 9 developed and very interesting by Anuka songs together with contemporary dance. We will not look at this, we will skip this, and now a bit of architecture and actual architectural history, which is maybe actually my field of expertise. So in the beginning, you saw actually the film documentary on exactly this site, that is Freedom Square in Kharkiv. And in the front, you can see the main gem of maybe the whole history of Soviet constructivism or Soviet interwar modernism, Держпром building. Держпром, it means the palace or the house of state industry. So that is kind of abbreviation, Державна промисловість, Держпром. And that is actually the office building that was kind of the maybe miracle of engineering back then in 1920s for Soviet Union and Soviet architecture, because it was one of the first cast-in-place concrete buildings. Cast-in-place, it means monolith building. And at the same time, the main idea of the building was to develop a huge structure which would work as an actually infrastructure because of the series or the lines of bridges. So you can see like 3 blocks or 3 quarters of different towers, like office towers or skyscrapers, connected via bridges, horizontal lines. From one side, it was the idea of some horizontality of Ukrainian power of 1920s, 1930s, because it was the period of national communism and some period of kind of liberation or kind of autonomy towards the central power of Moscow and Russia. And Ukraine definitely had kind of a glory age during this period of 1920s, 1930s. Moreover, it was an economical period of new economical politics, because usually when we talk about Soviet or socialist past, we think about command administrative, or as we call this in Ukraine, planned economy. So which means these 5-year plans. And maybe it's something that even you not remember, but maybe know from the history. So this planned economical thing is much more connected maybe with 1940s and until perestroika or rebuilding period of 1980s. But in 1920s, it was the period of new economical politics, which actually was a kind of the hybrid between capitalism and socialism. So, which gave a lot of freedom, for example, to factories, to trusts and syndicates. And actually, exactly this building of Gazprom was built as an office or headquarters for trusts and syndicates of all Ukrainian factories and industrial sphere. So quite an ambitious project. Moreover, it was developed according to the budgets and financed by these trusts and syndicates themselves. So, like when factory had some profits, all these profits could be used in different ways according to the decisions of, for example, trade unions of factories or the directors of factories, not by central administration or ministry from Moscow. So it was again some way of autonomy of decisions in Ukraine. That's why, for example, the decision of the trust and syndicates of industry in Ukraine was made to develop this large-scale, huge project. So here you can see some aerial shot made by actually German Nazi army from the plane before bombardments of Kharkiv. So here you can see on the foreground the house of projects, and then you can see exactly the Gazprom building. So all the square, this round square, was designed according to the principle of cooperation. So that's why you, yeah? Oh, everything's fine? Yeah? Okay, I have some problems with the sound. So here you can see three main actually buildings. Here, a house of cooperation. It's actually the main, again, headquarters, but for cooperation in agricultural sphere. So, which means actually farms. And then the house of industry, Gazprom, and house of projects. And in this house of projects, all the design for the whole Ukraine should take place. So all architectural bureaus, all urban planners, engineers, and architects. This building was like the main actually house or kind of a castle. So here you can see panoramic view on the square and a very modernist way of appearance of the building of house of projects on the left. There is a Gazprom building which is on the construction conditions on construction site. And for many years, exactly the Gazprom building was on temporary list of UNESCO World Heritage. And a lot of activists, together with academicians and together with heritage preservationists, they made a lot of attempts actually to push the nomination of Gazprom into the final and actual World Heritage List, permanent World Heritage List. Unfortunately, we didn't succeed in 2011, as I remember, in 2008. And then it was another wave of discussions on the decision of UNESCO World Heritage Committee on including Gazprom into the World Heritage List that took place in 2022, exactly because of the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine as a response of UNESCO and the UN in general to the aggression, unprovoked aggression of Russia against Ukraine. But unfortunately, in 2022, the chairman of UNESCO committee was Russia. That's why we again didn't succeed into the submission of our nomination into the current and permanent World Heritage List. That's why in 2023, UNESCO developed a separate list of objects under the threat in Ukraine, and Держпром was kind of nominated or listed as such a separate object of heritage of UNESCO, but actually not this actual World Heritage List. So it's very complicated story. What kind of heritage we preserve, what kind of heritage we would say is common heritage for the worldwide community of architects and preservationists, and what actually UNESCO protects. No, I will not show this, we will skip this. And definitely in 2022, the whole my path from this balancing between academy and between writing books and academic books, and at the same time developing my activist projects and activities in practitioner way, was changed because of this. And I hope that you will see and hear the video. So actually, this video was taken by locals in Saltivka district in Kharkiv, the largest mass housing residential area in Soviet Ukraine, and definitely, and even not only in Soviet Ukraine, actually, some researchers of modernist heritage, they called Saltivka as the biggest residential estate even in the whole Soviet Union. So approximately 500,000 people lived only in this district, not in Kharkiv. Kharkiv is a much larger city. It's near 2 million residents in Kharkiv, the population of Kharkiv. And I grown up, as I already said, in socialist city New Kharkiv. It's near Kharkiv tractor factory, but I was born in Saltivka district, and all my relatives they were trapped actually during the siege of Kharkiv, or partial siege of Kharkiv, but actually actual siege of Saltivka, because Saltivka was blocked by Russian army from 3 directions. And literally shelled by all types of weapons since the very first day of full-scale invasion, so since the 24th of February until now, to be honest. So unfortunately, we are already in the status of forgotten war, and not so much information on media already about Kharkiv. But even already 2 days ago and 1 day ago, Kharkiv was again shelled, and again residential houses, again people died, and today another residential areas in Odessa was hit by a Russian missile, and 10 people already dead. So it's something that going on. The war is not over. Sometimes I'm a bit annoyed because I'm invited to give a speech on reconstruction of the cities, or post-war reconstruction, or some kind of attempts to find healing or mooring through architecture and reconstruction in post-conflict and post-catastrophe zones. which I found incorrect and not accurate because Ukrainian war or Russian war actually against Ukraine still there. It's not over. And all of us, we are somehow included in all this process, and war is very complex and multidimensional phenomenon, which unfortunately already took a huge part, not only in my research as a subject of my research, but already the part of my methodology and part of my identity and part of my personal experiences. So now I look, so I tried actually to explain you how I try to deconstruct grand and very conventional and sometimes very rigid narratives of history through feminist theory, through decolonial theory or studies, through maybe sometimes neo-Marxist theory, attempts to decentralize historical narratives, as for example in my counter-argumentation to, for example, Jean-Louis Cohen, who looked at the history of 1920s, 1930s primarily through the lens of Moscow, and I tried to show that actually Soviet Union had a lot of different Soviet republics with different centers of the development of architectural schools and architectural thought. I did maybe some attempts to deconstruct even local, very maybe sometimes even right-wing centric nationalist concepts on the history of Ukraine through some kind of anarchist narratives from the perspective of activists and NGO representative. But then, when this happened, actually war turned to be one of my tools, how to look at the world, how to look at the history of architecture, how to look at the history of Soviet heritage and Soviet Union in general and my country, Ukraine. So this tool actually built another way of networks with whom we can solidarize, which experiences they are relevant to us. And now I found myself very often actually with, for me, maybe if I would remember myself 10 years ago, I would be surprised that I would take part in discussions or in panels together with architects and architectural historians or lawyers or barristers from Middle East, from Syria, from Palestine, or for example with researchers from Sarajevo, and so on. So new experiences happened, and of course I tried actually as any human being to look at things maybe from some practical and optimistic position, that even this very dramatic and very traumatic experience can make our understanding of the world bigger, but still would leave a lot of questions, unsolved questions, and there may be awareness that some phenomena in our world, they are uncomprehended. So for me, I still can't say that I comprehend fully the war and destruction and why it's going on. So the destruction, here you can see the picture actually of Freedom Square that I showed you in the very beginning with the film. And that is the regional administration of Kharkiv region, former Central Committee of Communist Party. We can definitely call this as a heritage of very problematic heritage of totalitarian regime that was designed in socialist realist style, and at the same time it was hit by a Russian missile on the 1st of March 2022. Near 43 people, they died in this building, together with very young activists of 21 years old. And you can see the photo that was made by my very close friend Pavlo Dorogoy, who was architectural photographer before the full-scale invasion. He actually made a lot of photos for my future book, which would be on Kharkiv Architectural Guidebook, but before the full-scale invasion. And in the moment of war, he found himself as a war journalist. And he even received as a team member, it was, yeah, he received, oh my gosh, I forgot the prize. I think maybe BAFTA, British Academy Award, but for Vice News short film, you can again try to find this film on YouTube. It's quite tough and quite difficult, actually, type of sensitive content. So he actually developed his path as a war journalist, but forcibly. And I was not the exception. I found myself as a maybe architectural critic or journalist again. This book is a collection of texts that I wrote during 2022. All of them, there is a very short form of actually articles, of manifesto, of different speeches, and mostly political speeches within the different institutions that I gave during 2022. And I would say that this genre, it was definitely not the academic writing, it was definitely not even pop science kind of non-fictional texts, but it was journalism. And few weeks ago, actually, Kharkiv was again shelled by guided aviabombs, Russian guided aviabombs. And here you can see the pictures that was taken by my father. He is an architect because I'm in third generation from architectural dynasty. So he was exactly on the surveys on the destruction of this building, on the damages of the building, within the team of local administration architects who made all these attempts to document the destructions for the future prosecution. We are not very much actually believe in the successful way of prosecution of Russia for the war crimes. But anyway, all the prosecutors together with architects, they try to document and investigate on war crimes, even on heritage sites. So Держпром was hit by guided aviabomb, Russian aviabomb. You can see this huge actually impact on the building. The few floors of the building, they were destructed. Fortunately, it was in the end of working day, but it was it is office building and people still work there. It was in the end of working day, just there exactly at 6 p.m. But fortunately, nobody died there. So here you can see again pictures of this very beautiful and stunning architectural object, very much iconic object. So for many years, I remember I led quite famous historians all over the world and architects and contemporary architects to this gemstone of heritage of the 20th century. And people nearly prayed near this building. But you can see now what's going on, and actually that architecture is not protected, and even heritage, even partially world heritage is not protected as well. And if we talk about movable heritage, for example, like museum assets, like paintings or sculptures, they can be moved. And even people, they sometimes can be displaced, which is another definitely social and cultural and political problem. There is another dimension of tragedy. But they have sometimes possibility to move. And if we talk about architecture, unfortunately, it's immovable heritage. Architecture can't be moved, can't be evacuated anywhere to the western border of Ukraine or somewhere to Europe. Architecture would be and would stay where it is or where it was. That's why I think there is something very difficult and very problematic about architecture and architecture in the face of aggression, especially with such type of new weapons, because this is definitely not the same type of weapons that were researched and investigated during the Second World War. It's absolutely different kind of a scale. Yeah, and here you can see maybe a few screens of my communication with my parents, with my close friends, just in the moment of the heat. And I will show you a small video of myself there in the summer of this year. So you saw actually me hugging this building, and because this year I was very lucky to visit my hometown Kharkiv for the first time after the full-scale invasion, and for me it was very important to see everything with my own eyes. And you can see that actually all Kharkiv dwellers and all Kharkiv residents really adore this building, and according even to some quizzes which took place before the full-scale invasion, exactly Dershprom building is a favorite iconic building for Kharkiv residents. So for now, I would maybe stop, and I would ask maybe to show the last movie. It's very short. It's not so long as the previous one. And this was a part of promo campaign for the book Ukrainian Modernism, Brutalism and Postmodernism. And then we can have Q&A session. So please, Andrea, if it's possible, show to our students the second movie.
Right. Thank you, Ievgenia, so much for this lecture. If I may say, it was quite moving. If you don't mind, I would decide not to show the movie since the first one didn't show properly and we have a little bit of technical issues with it. So we're gonna just send the links to our students and they can watch them in their own time, so that we have enough time for the questions. Okay, well, I have so many questions. I have to pull out my list here. Okay. I think to some students it may seem a little bit distant, to see the kind of the war zone pictures, and also, of course, heartbreaking. But it is also true that maybe this is a little bit controversial, but anyway, that we also can encounter these kind of like war zone images even in cities like Bratislava, where lots of these post-war heritage gets demolished within days just for developers to gain profit and build something bigger, shinier, maybe flats instead of cultural institutions. And you also work in London, when it's also quite discussed, this issue. Would you maybe care to say something about that? Because I mean, just to comment there, it seems like, okay, if a heritage is threatened by war, we immediately have to pull out some UNESCO lists, and we need to find a way to somehow protect it even a little bit if we can. But suddenly, if there's someone who says, no, I need to gain more profit, then suddenly hands off, okay, this person needs to do what they need to do. So what is your experience in this area?
Yeah, very interesting question, Andreas. Thank you very much. So you are absolutely right. We all actually interact, and we have some kind of experiences of destruction in different fields. It's not only about war and catastrophes, because we had a lot of talks, for example, with Turkish architects on the earthquake consequences and the destruction of not only heritage but built environment in earthquake zones. And I would summarize that the process is nearly the same. The difference is only actually what caused the destruction, and sometimes that is some natural causes, as we, for example, can talk about the earthquake situation. But if we talk about developers, I would consider them, maybe especially commercial developers, I would consider them as some kind of an aggressor. So, because it's quite aggressive approach, and here in London, definitely we all witness a lot of destruction of some social housing, of some residential areas, sometimes council property, sometimes that is a kind of occupation actually of public domain property. So, for example, parks, everything very much the same. And in Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion, especially in capital, in Kiev, we had the same problems with developers and with commercial construction sites. So the process of destruction itself is kind of a violence. So we can consider this as a violence, and definitely there is the victim of violence, whom we would consider as a victim, built environment, landscapes, or even people in whose property this land, for example, was, or these houses was. And definitely aggressor. So the structure of this relationship all the time is the same, but maybe the scale and motives, they are different. Or maybe I would be even more controversial than you, Andrea, that maybe motives sometimes they are the same. So, yeah, something like this.
Yeah, great. And do you think of any, because in London there's, in my experience, there is more talk about like this embodied carbon and how we can't afford to demolish buildings recklessly in the age of climate crisis, and we all see this like climate, it's like the weather is just getting worse and worse. Whereas in Central Europe, this part of the problem is not as much discussed. And we can only, list the building based on its architectural or cultural value. But just to stop something from being demolished just because it's maybe ethically wrong, it's really hard. But is there any way that you can think of that we can tackle this?
Yeah, I would even, I definitely would agree. There is kind of a difference, maybe even cultural difference. Maybe that is somehow connected, for example, with European Union legislation base. Because definitely Great Britain has a bit different legislation base according both to heritage preservationism and heritage sites, historical sites, and at the same time in the sphere of urban planning and good governance. So both factors, they are important, and maybe capitalism is another factor, and maybe a tradition, even cultural tradition. So in Eastern Europe, both with Ukraine, there is much more conflicts on exactly ethical ground, and who is actually the owner of the property. So it's much more like the conflict between, for example, stakeholders, between power, between developers and the people, and then activists on the side usually of people. So politicians, it depends. So it looks like very two-sided conflict. When in Great Britain, it's much more the question of money, and I would not say that it's so much ethical question here. So, and at the same time, the discourse, for example, of green technology or sustainability or ecological awareness, it's carbon footprint. It's something like kind of a wording, or kind of really a discourse, or some even kind of a shimmer or glitter, or just literally greenwashing to hide something that is beyond. So, for example, when they demolish some building, whether there is a heritage site or that is just a council property, or whether that is connected with gentrification and actually the displacement of people who lived in social housing before, they usually use as an excuse this greenwashing vocabulary, which I found quite disturbing because I feel that something is covered and some kind of manipulation take place.
Right. Just to add maybe to that, for others who are maybe not as much aware, and for our students, it's that usually the argumentation is that a new building will be much more efficient with energy, although one does never count the carbon footprint of what is getting demolished. And then there's also argumentation about like, no, this new building will have this certification of BREEAM and I don't know what, and golden this and silver that. Whereas it has been now accused, these kind of certificates, of basically greenwashing. You can demolish something, but if you put there 3 bike stands, you're good to go basically, and you have a sustainable building somehow. So it's
and maybe I would add on discussion on, for example, brutalist heritage, that before this they used another concept of definitely not ethical, definitely not something ecological. Before this, it was the trend to use aesthetical language, that people didn't like the aesthetics of buildings, that for example brutalism is ugly, gray, people didn't like them, it's something that spoiled our historical center, and so on. That's why it was again used as an excuse actually to demolish something that was a property of people and used for their needs.
Yeah, and also to add to that, it was also interesting because in Bratislava there was quite a big cultural complex, Istopolis, demolished, and this narrative of like people don't like it was quite strong. And then we pulled out a petition for people to sign if they would like to save it, and also comment if they have some nice memories in it. And I'm sorry, but like I'm hogging this time for questions, but this is just last comment from me. And actually, I think around 10,000 or 12,000 people signed it from around Slovakia, saying that you can't be serious, you can't demolish this beautiful building where when my father showed me where he worked, and all these memories that one relates with towards someplace. And suddenly this narrative just disappeared, and then indeed it was just immediately like, no, but we own this, and we can basically just do whatever we want with it.
And actually, that is, I need just to summarize this. I think it's quite important. Thank you, Andrea, because I think that it's actually a very practical and very political tool how we as historians or architects can oppose to such kind of very dangerous tendencies. We can involve people into this, both on the stage of design, if we talk about some not formal but actually actual participatory approach. And as historians, we need to involve people there. We need to see people there, not to tell stories only about aesthetics or about architects, but actually about people as well. Then we would use this like counter-argumentation because they had memory there. They had the feeling of belonging.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, I can never get over that one. Jesus. Okay, sorry. A question from one of our students. Can Soviet architecture, which often dominates Ukrainian cities, be meaningfully integrated into post-war reconstruction?
And first part of the question, can you repeat?
If it can be meaningfully integrated into post-war reconstruction. What do you mean?
So do we need immediately?
No, I think it's just a general question whether the Soviet architecture, I guess because it feels a bit dominant, if it can be meaningfully integrated into post-war reconstruction. I think the question is about I suppose aesthetics or the form of sorts. But I suppose the answer is yes. I think everything can be integrated. Or what do you think? After the war.
Yeah, of course, anything could happen and everything could be integrated. The most important thing is, again, if we talk about this ethical switch, and especially if we see people went through very traumatic experiences and they found actually some new level of belonging to their buildings, then it would be very important to make this even organizational shift into the changed in decision-making process. So exactly this participatory element is much more important than any aesthetical concepts on future reconstruction of the cities, any kind of visual ideas of integration, for example, of ruined buildings and so on. It would be great to integrate people into the design. So that would be great. And actually, for me, maybe I'm already not so much practitioner architect anymore. I'm too much in activism and too much in history. That's why for me it's much more interesting to involve people there than to have some nice result with some shiny pictures and about someone else's future. Because when we design something about someone's future, I think that is the moment when we should share this power to decide with these people for whom we actually design. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
A bit messy. Maybe it's a bit messy, but I think actually it's very important to leave our narcissistic belief that we know how to design futures of people.
Yes, great. Sorry, there's also a question for the students who sit in class, if they have any questions. Yes, please, but maybe you can come closer or shout, so, because there's a speaker right there. The blue thingy, I think. Yes?
This one.
No, it's fine, but you can speak normally.
Okay. Well, I just have a question that I was just thinking that whether some buildings in Ukraine after the war that are now ruins will remain ruins even after the war, just as a kind of a memorial of what happened. Even if you know like about any example
Or if you have any opinion in that everything should just be rebuilt immediately, or yeah, great question.
So it looks like quite simple question, but at the same time it's maybe still quite difficult one. So first of all, definitely few even panel prefabricated buildings, they are already conserved as sites of memory. Few of them they are in Bucha, it's northern part of Kyiv region. Few of them will be conserved in Kharkiv region and so on. So it's already something even not under the discussion, it's already decided. Another thing is about our again legislation base and our legal framework of such kind of decisions. If we talk about heritage sites, they should be conserved and then rebuilt as they were, according to Ukrainian law. You can't do anything else. So if any building was ruined, then it should be rebuilt in the same way as it was, if it was listed as a heritage site according to local heritage site list. So another part of all the things is much more connected with, for example, residential areas and housing, which were actually affected most of all, because a Russian army definitely has terrorist approach and terrorist method of destruction and of actually proceeding war. So they by purpose hit residential houses, and they by purpose hit exactly high rises social housing to kill as much as they could and as they still can, because Ukraine is not allowed to fight back, and Ukraine can't actually protect our cities. Only Kyiv is partially protected by air raid systems. So everything has a very much technological dimension why it happened as it happened. So residential areas, they are not protected as a heritage sites according to Ukrainian law, which means everything might be demolished and then built, something new would be built there. First, it was, for example, as I remember, some idea of Norman Foster, because Norman Foster is very much connected with a lot of reconstruction projects, not only in Ukraine, but as I remember, he took part even in some plans for reconstruction of Sarajevo, as usual, even in 1993, 1994. He immediately jumped into the thoughts and dreams and some fantasies on reconstruction in my hometown Kharkiv as well. and few competitions already took part. The first competition was exactly on North Saltivka residential area with panel prefabricated housing estates, and another one on Freedom Square that I showed you. If we talk about residential houses, the danger is that everything would be rebuilt in some new, fancy, and very optimistic way. Sometimes, in discussions with people, which I had there in summer, people really said that they are very interested in optimistic reconstruction because they were so tired of destruction and traumatic memories that they don't want to live on cemetery. They don't remember all the time traumas, and they even a bit made me uncomfortable because I understood that maybe I am in some position of obsession of, all this ruin porn or obsession with ruination in general, or architectural decay. It's so like decadence way of thinking about how beautiful ruination is. Sometimes drama or tragic memories, they need to be kind of memorial, and people didn't want to live in memorial. They wanted to return their lives back. But at the same time, that is something that is impossible to be done. You can't return your life and you can't just forget and erase traumatic memories. So it's still something that should be under discussion, I think, public discussion, and we definitely need some kind of public discussions, first facilitated by maybe activists in the field of such kind of decision-making process. But unfortunately, of course, local administrations and even ministries, they are not interested in long discussions. And for example, such star architects as Norman Foster, they are not interested in long discussions and involving people's opinions as well. They need to rebuild everything as fast as it's possible. At the same time, North Saltivka is still under the shelling. That's why even I have no idea, even because my master degree was actually in urban planning, and as an urban planner, I have no idea on what kind of data they actually based their ideas and their concepts and their strategies of development, because all this data might be changed in 2 days. So I think that it's much more about fantasies or architectural fantasies about some new peaceful future. That sometimes I think might never be happen at all.
Thank you. Maybe a question from me again, kind of getting back to what you just said now about Norman Foster and these other big architectural firms, kind of, yes, probably trying to help, but also kind of seeing the opportunity, right, and grabbing it. We also had our faculty, I think we had a lecture from an architect from Zaha Hadid Architects, who also talked about rebuilding Ukraine, and as you mentioned, Norman Foster as well. How do you even see this? You mentioned it a little bit, but we also talked during your lecture about decolonization and these sort of narratives, and what should Ukraine do? To use tools from other countries and from other architects that could be useful to you, but then don't end up colonized in the sense of like, okay, suddenly we need to build 2 million flats in a year, and suddenly there's these new cities popping up, sort of looking like a Hong Kong or something, So it would be relatable for people as well.
Yeah, definitely that is kind of a very colonial approach. It's just a very, I don't know, very iconic colonial approach. Because some privileged white men with very high status in society, they decided to decide actually how some people, no-name people, they would live in some, maybe in the middle of nowhere. Because, for example, the problem of Norman Foster Foundation is that they never been into Kharkiv, and Norman Foster himself never visited Kharkiv at all. I think that is the one dimension of the problem is this colonial thing. Another thing that it's not very much helpful for Ukrainian society and for Ukrainian culture and architects and so on, because it doesn't stimulate the development of architectural thought and the architectural field for Ukrainian architects and for Ukrainian society. But it's not even, it's again something about, I don't know, capitalizing on trauma or capitalizing on destruction. It's the one part of the question. But another one is that they might make mistake. That is the most important thing about all these colonial approaches. They might just not understand, not comprehend what's going on there, what kind of site they have, what kind of people they work with. That is the most dangerous part of all this process, that they just didn't see the site and they didn't see people for whom they designed this. That is, I think, even worse than that they suppress Ukrainian architects. I think that to visit the place, that is such a great opportunity for them, not only for us, but even for them to develop something new in architectural field and something new in architectural discussion on destruction. Because still, with the students of the Bartok School of Architecture, when we discuss topics on the destruction, that is usually not more than 3 concepts. What shall we do with the cities after the war, during the reconstructions? Usually there is a Warsaw case, that is how to rebuild everything as it was, but it was criticized because it was kind of a false approach. Then very modernist approach, just to demolish all these ruins, to erase all these ruins, and to develop something very modernist, like in Rotterdam, for example, Panderrecht and so on, which was definitely very much criticized by postmodernists in 1980s. And exactly, you mentioned Zaha Hadid as architects. So deconstructivist architects and deconstructivist discourse, first of all, British architects, produced the very iconic text of Woods, who suggested new way of thinking about destruction and ruination. He suggested to preserve ruins and to conserve these woods, and to conserve these scars and highlight them. But even with our students, we understood that what was actually something that Woods never seen. He never seen people. So he designed all the things for Sarajevo, but he never seen Sarajevo people. And he actually had no idea about their traumas. He understood everything in a very aesthetical way, as shapes, forms, as the shape, and even obsession with the shape of the wound, but not actually people who experience this trauma. So I hope that it would give, for example, if these even very privileged architects, very famous architects, would have possibility just to buy tickets, they are not very expensive, by the way, to Ukraine, to Kharkiv, and to visit the sites that they want to make fantasies on. It would give them opportunities to understand that actually there is 4th, 5th, 6th new ways how to respond to trauma and how to respond to war.
It's so interesting when you talk about trauma in the built environment. Also, in the short movie in the beginning, you mentioned Lenin, and it's also the narrative sometimes, even in Central Europe, kind of talking about ideology that is somehow embodied in the buildings, even though they were not designed as propaganda, let's say, of socialism or totalitarianism, that there is still something of it in the buildings, and we need to get rid of it and demolish it now. Whereas we a lot of times think that we should be able to have some memory left, to be able to remember our history. Other people kind of argument that for them it's traumatic to see these buildings that kind of remind them of this past era. What do you think? I guess there can't be really any general approach to that.
Yeah, and it's something that even I felt before, I was very much scared, maybe even when I was a young architect or student of university or from architectural faculty. I was all the time afraid to lose emptiness. I all the time felt that exactly emptiness is something that is in property of people. And we need to preserve emptiness. And I was very much surprised when we found these interviews with Kharkiv residents who said that preserve emptiness. So that we don't need anything, we need emptiness to be preserved. So I think that that is actually something that is very much connected even with the space of negotiations, with the space where people would have possibility actually to discuss, like dialogue space, which should be preserved. And this emptiness, it's not something that architects should be afraid of, because I found some patterns that we should build as much as we can. And when we see and focus on some empty spot in our build environment, we should immediately fill the gap. You know, when we see gap, we think that we need to fill the gap. I think it's something that is kind of an unprocessed trauma. We should sometimes fixate on this emptiness and fixate on this wound and be okay with something that is not there. Because, for example, the second competition, which is right now taking place, organized by Norman Foster Foundation, it's exactly on the reconstruction of Freedom Square. And it's not only for the reconstruction of the partially demolished building of regional administration, it's even on the whole the space, empty space of the Freedom Square. And you can see this very, I think, very immediate kind of instinct, architectural behavior, that they saw empty square and they need immediately build something there, even according to the framework of the competition tasks. So I think that is very dangerous thing. And again, how we exclude people, even not to see people there, but just to fulfill all the gaps with some buildings, with some structures.
It's so interesting, and maybe a comment for our students if they want to look into this a little bit more. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a few years ago there was a competition for like a parliamentary square, like with buildings in Norway, in Oslo. There were some buildings that were built in post-war era that were damaged during Breivik's attack, and somehow, you know, maybe our approach as outsiders would be to, you know, to renovate it and basically just change the glass in the windows and move on. And sort of also make it as a statement of like, yes, this terrorism on this democratically elected, you know, government, that it's will not last, or we don't even want to remember it, to be honest. But they immediately made a competition on how to demolish several of these buildings and build a new. Lots of these employees also said that they do not want to work in these buildings since the Breivik's attack. And it was quite interesting to see that a lot of these competition entries were precisely about just like covering every single gap in between the buildings and building more and more and more and more. It was quite interesting to see where all these little squares and with different hierarchies and stuff were suddenly just filled in to the brim, which was sad.
Yeah, and I think from actually at the same time, we shouldn't be very much judgmental to this approach, because it's quite natural. Even in our personal way, how we deal with trauma. Trauma usually happens somewhere in the past. We can stuck in the past, but at the same time, what people usually do, they try to overact and not to precede the trauma, not to be in reality right now, and jump immediately into solutions. It's how actually we as human beings try to survive. That's why I think that it's quite natural, but at the same time it gives and provides a lot of bias and a lot of distortions that actually make like a concrete repetition of the very toxic patterns, behavioral patterns. And architects, they are in this quite toxic, because that is maybe in the essential meaning of architectural profession. We have some gap, again, some gap there, some emptiness there. Because usually architectural historians, they work with past, right? And architects, practitioners, they usually work with future. They give you solutions, how everything would be in 20 years, in 10 years, in 2 years. It's all about future, like future tense, you know, in linguistics. And then we have actually present, we have reality, we have now. And nobody works with now. Nobody works with reality from the point of view of architects. It's our trap, it's our tragedy. We don't see now. That's why even, I don't know, urban forums that I just returned from that were organized by the UN Habitat. It's all about solutions, but nothing about that actually all these solutions, they are irrelevant because maybe even people for whom they designed this would die in few days. That's why, yeah, not to see reality, that is something very problematic and kind of a crisis, I would say, for architectural profession.
Interesting, yes. We have another question from the students from our Slido. What is the current view of the Ukrainian, I suppose it's supposed to be historiography of architecture, professionals who work with the history of architecture, on the heritage of the Soviet Union? So what is maybe the prevailing view on it, or
Yeah, for before the full-scale invasion, I think that exactly this slightly kind of a conflict between Soviet heritage or difficult heritage and people and intellectuals and activists took place because definitely it was something on discussions whether we should demolish or reconstruct or forget or add something or interpret in some new way. So yes, it was really very much a lot of discussions on this. But after the full-scale invasion, I think the perception actually changed a bit in a bit more mature way. That people are not so interested in exactly, for example, buildings anymore, because they really under the threat of losing these buildings. People really develop this belonging to them, and people really like fall into panel prefabs and gray, ugly Soviet buildings again. But not because they are Soviet, but because they are there, because they are under the threat, because they can be demolished, and people understood this very well. Moreover, these traumatic experiences, when you spend some, I don't know, days in the basements of some Soviet buildings or on the underground or metro during the missile attacks, built, you know, these trauma-bonded relationships with built environment. People would not prefer demolish this anymore. If we talk about, for example, epistemologic justice or titles, yes, there is already like I would say even public consent that all the Soviet titles should be changed, names and so on. But what was quite interesting that before the full-scale invasion, we had not so much understanding and not so much discussions on decolonial issues connected with Russian Empire, because we really believed like that Russian Empire actually collapsed in 1917. We really believed that empire fall apart. And that it's only kind of Russia, and Russia it's a bit something different in comparison with the Russian Empire and so on. But because of this violence, I think that even in public understanding and intellectuals understanding, we changed our mind and we understood that there is imperialistic war and that the empire actually didn't disappear. Empire is still there, and we were treated as a colony. And we are under the threat of erasure and genocide. And that's why there is a urge, need to change, and there is something like even psychological coping strategy to change all the titles from the Russian Empire. So like Lermontov, Pushkin, all other guys from great Russian culture. That is not even something that was ordered from up to down. It's kind of a grassroots initiative. People don't want to live on Pushkin Street anymore.
I see, I see. Okay, and then maybe last question that I found interesting during your presentation was this modernistiski, if I'm saying it right, because, well, this is a complicated question, but I'm gonna try to be short. Because even in Slovakia, as I worked, in Sweden before, and their gender was never kind of discussion. It was very politically correct, and one would never be judged based on their gender. Whereas in Slovakia, a lot of people can somehow say, oh, but you're a woman and you're an architect, wow, Even though it's been the case for a long time that even in school, most students are women, there's sort of, so it's when you look at it realistically, there is no question. But somehow, I do encounter such comments or questions that are kind of hard to answer, and I wonder, since you did some research on it, maybe you can enlighten me. There is this idea of like, oh, but as women, you bring to the architecture something feminine and pretty, and these sort of things that seems very gender normative. We also, in our post-war era of architecture, we also had some very good architects who did a lot of engineering buildings, telecommunication buildings, nothing pink or baroque looking, or what should I say. So it does not seem exactly fair to judge us by that, on those terms. On the other hand, I suppose that, you also said yourself, what is this white old youth, telling me what should I do with my city or not, since he hasn't been here even. So what is during your research or during your time as an architect or historian, so what is your view? Because obviously there is something that we bring to the table, and supposedly it's not pink and pretty. And so what is it? Or is it just way too gender normative way of looking at it, and just everybody is an individual and brings something different to the table?
Yes, thank you, Andrea. Great question. I think that they should be afraid of us, and we should keep in secret what we actually will bring to the table.
Wow.
Because it might be maybe being fearlessly political. I think that is something that we can do, because we, as nobody else, we definitely, as a second sex, we know what does it mean to be a woman, and actually how to not be afraid of anything, because we were the same like the buildings in Ukraine. We were under threat from the very beginning of our appearance in the world. So I would even suggest maybe to think about very interesting path. Maybe students would like to Google her name, Lotta Stambeze. She was one of the historical figures who actually inspired us to develop our modernistic conferences and discussions. She was a student of Bauhaus. She was the first student of architectural faculty in Bauhaus, because when we say that Bauhaus was like the paradise for leftist thinkers, it's not actually fully relevant, because women, they were not allowed actually to attend architectural faculty, and Lotte Stambeze was the first one. And she was kicked out from Bauhaus because she had an affair with the director of Bauhaus, Hannes Meyer, one of the most prominent German leftists and Marxists, who then escaped to Siberia in Russia. And she was left with no diploma, with no money, with no family, with a child, alone. Nobody helped her, and she moved to Ukraine. She moved to Kharkiv, to my hometown, and she was a member of the team, design team of Kharkiv Tractor Factory, Socialist City, New Kharkiv, where I grew up. Then it was a long path, because all these stories, they usually non-linear stories, non-linear biographies, because it's female biographies. She moved to Rotterdam, and after the Second World War, as a German, she was very much aware of collective responsibility of Germans. She led the reconstruction of Rotterdam, and she was actually the author of this erasure of historical environment, ruined historical environment of Rotterdam, and construction of such residential areas as Pendrecht. She was a member of Siam 6, which is again very interesting place and very interesting story to talk both about gender and about architecture of the 20th century, where they produced a lot of ideas how to reconstruct cities after destruction. So she was so strongly political that she wrote her manifesto. She was aware not only about class injustice, not only about spatial injustice. She openly talked about colonialism. She openly talked about black people. She talked about immigration, and all this was absolutely open. And what was quite interesting that she, even in the 80s, talked about Soviet Union and how she was disappointed, being even the member of Communist Party, what she saw in Ukraine in 1930s, and that it was definitely not what Soviets actually said everyone abroad, that all this was kind of propaganda and not true, and she saw dead people on the streets and so on. So that's what we can actually bring to the table, being aware, being honest, and being political, because everything person was political, and we know this. I hope that it would be the new age, fully designed by our principles.
That sounds great. I would love that. I'm just a little bit worried, and then, well, I'm a bit of a pessimist.
Let's do this, everything
Yeah, okay, sure.
So yeah, let's start.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to stop our talk. Well, it turned into a talk, but anyway. And I'm very grateful for our students' questions as well. They were really interesting, and especially I'm really grateful for your presentation, Ievgenia, and then you were here, and we were able to ask you all of these questions and get like really interesting questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. See you as well.
See you. Bye.
Bye.